away from 8.
The voice of the creative economy, Vincent Heeringa with Wammo on Kiwi.
It's from our Dialogue, good nzmarketing.press.co.nz. The voices of the future, perhaps. It's Vincent Heeringa. Good morning.
Good morning, Wammo.
I say future, of course, because we're talking about the future of online media today. One of my favourite topics, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah, glad we're talking about this. But what's your spin on it today?
Well, I wanted to talk about publishing because obviously that's a subject dear to me heart. I'm talking tomorrow to a assembled group of luminaries from the marketing community, and I thought I'd practice on you first, Wammo.
Yeah, fine.
Apparently,
not just me, of course. The listeners, the viewers.
Quite right. You mean people are listening? How terrifying. The problem for newspapers has been the twin evil sisters, or the evil twin sisters of a recession, combined with the ongoing assault that online publishing is having on newspapers. So it's quite hard to separate sometimes the two things. But actually, even before this recession, the recession's amazing, and it's had a catastrophic effect on advertising in the newspaper business and advertising in general. But it's just exacerbated a fairly slow and steady decline in the paid readership of newspapers in particular.
Right.
Actually, magazines are doing okay, but it's newspapers that suffer the most, and they get hit by two sides. You know, classifieds has always been the mainstay of revenue for newspapers, and of course the rise of eBay and TradeMe has just completely decimated that revenue for them. In fact, I was just reading the US. In 1997 was when classifieds peaked for newspapers, and since then there's been a 65% drop in classifieds revenue.
Around about the time that the internet started going mainstream.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just going back to, because you were saying that were you saying subscriptions are down? People actually paying for papers.
Yes.
Because it's hard to know who to believe, because newspapers always print these stories about themselves. Basically, they always say, well, circulation is up this year. Yeah.
First thing, New Zealand Herald's an unusual beast. You know, it doesn't follow the mainstream newspaper trends, and that's partly because it's a monopoly, and so they don't have any competition, really, and so have done an amazing job of maintaining their readership.
And the press often says the same thing as well in the South Island.
Yeah. What they mean by readership and circulation are two different things. That readership is the number of people who read your publications, and that's a different thing from people who actually pay for it.
Okay.
So you can often demonstrate readership growth just simply by the population growth, because more people are around, so more people are seeing your magazine or newspaper. Plus, now, I don't know, in the States you can, I don't think in New Zealand you can count online readership as part of your readership in the States, and that's how they've been able to keep up their readership numbers while circulation is falling.
Right. Well, you should be able to count the online people, shouldn't you?
Yeah, but the trouble is that you're talking about two, because those numbers are done for advertisers, right? And you're talking about two different types of advertising.
Okay. That full-page Briscoe's ad isn't getting in front of the online people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, they do an online campaign.
Yeah.
Anyway, the general trend is for a slow erosion in the paid readership of newspapers, and then classifieds, and then of course the recession. So people like Rupert Murdoch are desperate to try and arrest the decline, and he's come up with a very interesting idea. You may remember he threatened a little while ago to pull out of Google altogether. Did you know that, Wammo, that he said he's going to de-index all his newspapers from Google?
Ridiculous step. He was going to make sure that people couldn't search his newspapers through Google, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And at the time, people said, well, that's madness. That's like sort of getting off the grid, you know. It's like disappearing off the face of the earth, because Google is the earth. Well, what he didn't mention, and people were speculating, but it's almost confirmed. It's certainly being hinted at by Microsoft and by Murdoch himself, that he's doing a deal with Microsoft, their search engine Bing, which they are trying to launch as a rival to Google. Whereby every Murdoch newspaper or News Limited newspaper will get delisted from Google and have an exclusive search engine arrangement with Bing. And instead of selling online advertising to all comers, it would be an exclusive arrangement. So Bing would hold all the traffic and hold the advertising rights around, the whatever Bing's equivalent of Google AdWords are, and just pay a license fee to Murdoch. So he would, from Microsoft, get a great big whopping fee once a year. And that way he's also able to still retain his search capability through Bing, but get Google out of the mix.
Which ignores where consumers are and consumer habits and what consumers want to do. It's basically, that's all about what he and Microsoft wants to do as opposed to what people want to do. I
suppose that's probably right, and Bing is only it's less than certainly less than 10. The latest figures have been about 8.8% of all search goes through Bing, so it's not insignificant. It's quite big, but it's nowhere near as big as the behemoth of Google. That's quite a dangerous strategy because in some ways he may find that he's nobbling himself.
And well, that's right, and because Murdoch's part of this old guard that they still reckon that they can direct people, that they can tell people what they want to consume, and where they want to consume it, and how they want to consume it. But the table turned a long time ago. It's now in the hands of the consumer. The consumer will tell newspapers and will tell media outlets how they want to consume it, when they want to consume it, and what they want to consume. I
guess that's right in theory. So how do you make a business out of that, Wammo? Because
by delivering what consumers want.
Right. Yeah, the trouble is what consumers want is free information, and he's trying to find a way to pay his journalists and photographers and his printers and his all the people that contribute to making a newspaper who want to be paid, presumably. He needs some revenue to pay those people. I'm neither on his side nor against him. I'm very interested to see. There's a second element to what he's doing, which is trying to remove some of the free content and move to a paid model. So it's like a pay-per-view exercise.
Yeah.
The model for this is the Wall Street Journal, which, despite having most of its content as subscriber only, has actually managed to grow its circulation and grow its online revenue through readers. It's one of the few examples actually of a newspaper doing it online.
But isn't an emerging area for revenue, and I know that you've talked about this before, and it's something that you guys do at HP Media, is sponsored content, where the consumer knows that the content that they're reading is sponsored, but they still find it useful. It's paid for advertising, but it's useful to the consumer.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do a bit of that, and I'm sure he does too, but, that still is a small, it's significant, but it's a small component compared to 1 million people paying a small amount, if you know what I mean. So if he can find some sort of pay-per-view model where his millions of readers are paying a small amount every time to read an article, that's quite significant. That starts really getting back into that kind of reader revenue subscriber model. And this is where it gets more interesting, because Google are working on some kind of, the talk is some sort of micropayments mechanism where you've got a kind of Google currency, and instead of subscribing, say, to Ideologue magazine or to the New Zealand Herald, what you have is the ability online, which is a pain in the ass, to be frank. You need to get your credit card out, you need to sign up for a year. It's quite a clunky and old-fashioned mechanism. What if you were able just kind of invisibly to pay for a story that was painlessly paid for and invisible? Every time you wanted to read something, you could just pay it with your Google bucks or whatever they're going to call such things. that would be quite an interesting model, so that it becomes a really fluid thing, and you don't have to subscribe to one newspaper. What you're paying for is each story as you go.
Okay.
That would be a kind of interesting model.
It's another option. Gosh, there's probably a few up there, and as we've mentioned before, it's a really interesting time to be.
Hey, there's one more. If I can have I got time to squeeze it in?
Yep.
Something that from Wired magazine that has just freaked me out completely, because we were kind of dabbling in this space, but this company called Demand Media has just taken the idea of online publishing and just given it and put it on acid, basically. So, you know, what we've been talking about is the traditional publishing world trying to make sense of the online world and trying to make it work, you know, which is pretty much where I've come from. But this is a company that has just grown up. So this is a kid who has grown up with a Google view of the world and has come up with a completely different way of creating a media company that is a Google kind of, you know,